and left. Keep in mind that once you grant zoning, if a developer comes in and says, I have a permitted use that's allowed under the zoning classification, and I'm going to meet the setback requirements, and I'm going to meet the other requirements that's contained in the UDO, there's absolutely no legal basis to deny that application. Absolutely no legal basis to deny that development. And if you do, you'll get sued, you can lose. Plain and simple. The fifth LaSalle factor is suitability of the property for the current use and current zoning. I think I've addressed that already. The sixth factor is the length of time the property has been vacant as zoned. I would submit to you that it's not vacant. It's being used for an intended purpose of agriculture. It is, as they say, a family farm. It's being used for agricultural purposes. There have been a number of proposals over time for the development of that site residentially, or most recently in 1999, the Taubman Company for a 1.2 million square foot super regional shopping center. The communities felt that that was inappropriate in terms of the size and scale of that and the detrimental effects that that would bring on our communities. The seventh point under the LaSalle factors is the care with which the county and the villages have undertaken to plan use under the framework plan and comprehensive planning processes. I would submit to you that both the county and the villages have spent a considerable amount of time going through those planning processes, and in fact have come out with what they believe is an appropriate use for the property. And I would ask under the UDO, there is a series of zoning maps by township, and this is a section of the area in Villa Township for this parcel. This zoning map was effective as of last year, and this is the county's most recent pronouncement in terms of the zoning map of future land uses here. And the county said estate zoning. It didn't say general commercial. It didn't say anything else. This has been adopted by the county board as part of the UDO zoning ordinance and the zoning maps. It said the state. And we submit that that is the appropriate current zoning unless and until you have a real meat and potatoes kind of presentation by a developer with all of the specifics. The eighth factor is community need for the proposed use, and I think that has been largely addressed by others, but I would add that if you look at what was proposed back in 1999, Taubman attempted to justify that proposal by saying that we need shopping. We have to go 15 to 25 miles to get any substantial shopping around here. Well, the fact is we've got Vernon Hills. We've got what has been referred to as 1.2 million square feet down in the Deer Park, Killdeer area. And none of that, by the way, is anchored by large stores down there. There are no anybody that would be considered an anchor down there. We've got Woodfield. We have other areas. And I have to tell you that while people talked to me when I was mayor about getting some development, nobody said they absolutely had to have a Macy's next door. Never once. I heard a lot of things, got called a lot of names, but never once did anybody come tell me that they needed a Macy's next door. I would also point out, as Mr. Smith did, if you look at the surrounding uses that are here, you look at the Quentin collection, 180,000 square feet, currently has a 27% vacancy. Deer Park Town Center, 375,000 square feet, has 10 vacancies listed on their website as of yesterday. The Shops at Killdeer has vacancies. We've got a vacant Kmart in Lake Zurich that's been vacant for 10 years. It's never been redeveloped. We've got the center up at 12 and 176. All of these are in very close proximity to this area, and we can't fill the sites we have. And so the question I pose to you is it good planning practice? Is it sound planning practice? Is it best management practices to simply put up another mall or another retail center, the effect of which is to cannibalize other existing businesses? That is exactly what we saw with Deer Park Town Center. Everybody went there because it was new, it was bright, it was shiny. But at the end of the day, we ended up losing other businesses. We saw that when Walmart and Costco came in and we lost Kmart. So I think we need to be very mindful how we go through and address those issues. In Exhibit 20 in your book, there's also, I think, something which very clearly highlights differences in the planning processes that have been used by the county in coming up with a regional framework plan and the UDO versus the villages in their plans. If you could go to that slide, do that there first. Under Hawthorne Woods zoning ordinance, the FAR, the maximum FAR that's permitted is 0.2. North Barrington is also 0.2. Lake Zurich is 0.22, and Lake County is up to 0.3. So if you look at the 53-acre site that's been proposed here, the maximum square feet that you get on 53 acres is 424,000 feet. There also are limitations to the height of what's allowed under those zoning ordinances. What's being proposed here is 65 feet. And the purpose of this slide is to show its incompatibility with the surrounding height limitations that are routinely imposed by Hawthorne Woods, North Barrington, and Lake Zurich. So even though Lake Zurich has substantially more commercial development than either of the other two communities, even though Lake Zurich has really been the commercial center or commercial anchor in this part of Village Township or this part of Lake County, they still restrict height to 35. Nowhere, anywhere up and down the railroad corridor has allowed 65 feet in height. It simply is inappropriate given the nature of the surrounding uses. There was also, I think, a lot of testimony in the applicant's case about prior efforts to develop this property, whether Hawthorne Woods was user-friendly, whether Hawthorne Woods was anti-development or was allowing people. And I have to tell you that during the time that I was mayor, it came right on the heels of the Taubman Mall controversy, 2 years later. And within 2 weeks after we took over, we sat down with Bruce Heckman from Taubman, and we talked, and we attempted to broker a deal with Taubman, the Dimucci's, and the school district. Because the school district was looking for property on which to build a new school, which eventually went along with McHenry Road. We've had meetings with the Dimucci family to talk about appropriate development on their site. On at least 4 occasions, I personally traveled to Las Vegas and attended the International Shopping Center Council show to specifically market properties in Hawthorne Woods. And on the back, the very back page of our development brochure, and a copy of this is also in your books, as I think Exhibit 14. The primary piece of real estate that we were out there trying to look at to see if we could find somebody that would come up with an appropriate commercial development consistent with the boundary agreements was the Dimucci parcel. So to suggest that we've been unable to do that or unwilling to do that is simply not the situation. There was much talk about the 1999 mall hearings, and I would simply point out that we've included in our books Exhibits 8 and 9. Given the paucity of details submitted by the applicant in this case, we thought it was important that this body consider that the record contained more substantial and more in-depth analysis that was done by the developer in the Taubman submission. And so we've included the Taubman submission that was made to the two villages, and also the traffic study that they submitted. I would note that the real estate valuation expert that was used in connection with Taubman was Mr. Roderick, the same individual who testified here. And in that case, he said 1.2 million or 1.4 million square feet has absolutely no impact, and we've included his report. Wouldn't have any deleterious effect on the surrounding area, wouldn't have any diminishing effect on real estate values. Now he's down at 650 or 800,000 feet, and there's still no effect. Apparently size doesn't matter Whatever it is, he says there's no effect. And I submit to you that his having used given testimony at 1.2 million square feet in connection to the Cobbin proposal, and his coming in now at something that's literally almost half the size or 3/4 the size, simply shows that his testimony is not to be believed. It's simply not credible.
Mr. Hunt, you're coming up on an hour. How much more time you need?
Sir, we have, I have a little bit more in my presentation. We have another witness, Mr. Schmidt, and we have 3 or 4 other witnesses who will be extremely short, probably in the nature of, I would guess, about 10 to 15 minutes apiece. I would simply state for the record that the applicant did not receive any limitations on the length of their presentation. And I think that fundamental fairness and due process require that we be afforded the same.
Okay, try and wrap it up as fast as you can.
I'd like to address the comprehensive planning process that has gone on in Hawthorne Woods. One of the points that was made by the applicant was that there is a statement contained in the 2004 comprehensive plan that indicates that 50 acres is an appropriate size, or is what Hawthorne Woods planned for. I am here to tell you it is not. What we're showing you now is a portion of the map that was included in the comprehensive plan. I have confirmed with our village planner, Al Maiden from Roth Campbell and Associates, that in fact this is the correct the correct version. Shows the intent of Hawthorne Woods and accurately reflects what was depicted in the boundary agreement. What was in the text was an error from the prior boundary agreement. It was not picked up as a typo, and for that, I personally apologize. I guess that buck stops with me. But the fact of the matter is, this is the diagram that's in the Hawthorne Woods Comprehensive Plan, the current plan adopted in 2004. And as you see, this red area denotes the area that would be appropriate for commercial development, and the surrounding areas are intended to show that this would be that they would be more appropriate for residential uses or other types of uses that can be used as a buffer to the homes on the other side of Old McHenry Road. Both village, and I would call your attention to Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 23 in our book for that purpose. Both the village's comprehensive plans have called for modest, low-impact, low-density development on the site, including a retail component. Boundary agreements in those cases were the product of 2 separate sets of public hearings. Lengthy public hearings in 1996 in the village of North Barrington, and then again, a set of very substantial, lengthy, and often sometimes contentious public hearings in 1998 and 1999 conducted by the village of Hawthorne Woods. Literally, hundreds of hours were spent in conducting those public hearings, in preparing witnesses' testimony, and I would suggest hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent both by the applicant, the village, and by AGR in addressing those particular development proposals. What does that all mean? There's no rush to judgment. A lot of time, effort, and money has already been spent in planning the appropriate use of this site. And the result of that process was good, old-fashioned, arm's-length negotiation and a willingness to compromise by both sides. I mentioned earlier some of the efforts that we had in terms of trying to market this property. We've also included exhibits in our book, I believe exhibits 16 through 18, which talk about and show specific mock-ups and attempts that we had to present visualization of how the boundary agreement could appear in real life. How, if it came to life and you were to develop something that was consistent with the restrictions in the boundary agreement, how it could look and how you could have a substantial, very vibrant, and sustainable retail development as part of an overall site plan for that. I would also add one thing. I don't see Mark here this evening, but one of the points that Mr. Eiden made in his presentation was that a suggestion that the village of Hawthorne Woods was difficult to work with. For that reason, we've included Exhibit 12 and Exhibit 13 in our book. Mr. Eiden came to the village of Hawthorne Woods himself with his own personal development that he proposed called Owl Haven Farms. He submitted that proposal in January of 2007. I'm sorry, 2007. Just 2 months later, he received concept approval and a PUD ordinance. 2 months. We worked with him over a course of about 6 months to come up with an appropriate site plan there. But he flew through the village. It was a parcel that was adjacent to the Toll Brothers Hawthorne Woods Country Club. And it was something that they wanted to do, and he and his then partner at that time, Mr. O'Donnell, proposed uses, came through, and went through the village very, very quickly. The Lake County Framework, Regional Framework Plan, Section 10 of that plan indicates that in the year 2020, Lake County will have communities that retain their distinct character, have an enhanced sense of place, and a positive self-identity. We submit that the proposed zoning here conflicts with that stated goal under the Regional Framework Plan. Another goal is that new developments, both residential and commercial, should be compatible and harmonized with the desirable character of adjacent buildings and streetscape. That proposal that the developer, or that the landowner has come up with in this case, violates that tenet. It violates that tenet of good planning because it's going to change the character of the surrounding community, and it ignores pre-existing uses. The framework plan map, which is Exhibit 21, also talks about future land uses, as I showed you earlier. It is the county has done that estate going forward. There's also an slide for Section 5. Under the UDO, Section 5.11 defines general commercial, and it defines it as a district that's intended to accommodate commercial uses. It is not a neighborhood-oriented district. Now that was make you stop right there and say, hey, wait a second, why are we looking at that, seeing all the green that was surrounding on those maps that we looked at before? It says it's not generally appropriate for application within existing residential areas. That's what we have here. So by its own definition, a GC designation is inconsistent when you have to use a shoehorn to fit it in. One of the other concerns that we have about the UDO being applied here, and consistent with Mr. Sousa's comments, once you grant zoning, you've got that zoning. You've got a developer who can come in and say, okay, I have a permitted use, I'm going to meet all the standards. Well, if you look at the list of permitted uses and conditional uses under the UDO, we've got things that would be wildly inconsistent with the character of the surrounding community, and yet they are either permitted or conditional uses that are allowed in a general commercial zoning classification. Things like amusement parks, utility plants, commercial parking structures, adult entertainment. I would stop there, and I know that was one of the things that the villages discussed and that they've included as part of their proposed agreement. But the fact of the matter is that agreement doesn't include all the ones that ought to be on that laundry list of inappropriate or inconsistent uses. You've got kennels, consumer vehicle sales and rental, boat storage, lumber building supplies, RV sales, landscape contractor, storage yards, feed and grain sales, bus and truck parking, recycling centers, airports, heliports, bus terminals, and taxi parks. There are many, many things. And the reason I went through all those is to point out one very simple thing. You're not being asked to define a PUD that's going to specifically strike out each of the inconsistent or incompatible uses. You're being asked to grant zoning. And when you grant zoning, it's like, kind of like being pregnant. Either you are or you aren't. Either you get commercial or you don't get commercial. And when you get commercial, you get the whole thing and everything that comes with it. And you don't get to just simply parse out on a request for rezoning certain things that you might not like. You're granting all those uses as well as the ones that you might like as well. And so I think you need to be very, very careful in looking at that. I would point out, if you can go to that service. One of the things that we find very concerning about the application that's made here is the fact that there's a reliance or a statement that, well, the developer's going to agree to rely on the pattern book. The pattern book is just that. It is a suggestion. If you look at the UDO, it defines words like shall, will, and must, and also may and should. And may and should are advisory, discretionary, they're not binding on the developer or the applicant. If you look at the 63-page pattern book that Eric took us through, you will see that only 15% of the time are those requirements or those guidelines mandatory. The other 85% of the time are discretionary. Now, if they're discretionary, what are we saying? Trust me? This is what's going to happen? You know, because you know what's going to happen is as soon as the applicant comes back in the future, as soon as the developer comes in, they're going to say, well, yeah, we understand that the Dimucci family agreed to those terms, but we're a different group. We can't do that. It's not economically feasible. Now we need relief from these guidelines. And that's exactly why those guidelines are intended to be used, not in connection with this blanket zoning application, but rather as part of a PUD negotiation where you can sit down and go through them guideline by guideline and know at the end of the day that either we've agreed to everything or we've agreed to nothing. Either we've got a deal or we don't have a deal. But we're not then stuck hoping to trust that someone in the future will decide to do the right thing and do what they should rather than what someone is told they must. Finally, I'd like to talk just very briefly about traffic. We've included exhibits in our exhibit book with IDOT traffic counts. In 1999, and we included this as part of the traffic study from the Taubman, which I believe is exhibit 9 or 10. We've included showing that the traffic count in 1999 was about 26,000 cars per day on Route 12 and only 8,300 on Old County. The population at that time was actually less than 5,000 in Hawthorne Woods. Today the population in Hawthorne Woods alone is over 8,500, and there's been a 65% increase in population since that time, with no substantial lane improvements or changes to Old Henry Road. Traffic now is more in the nature of about 23,000 cars per day. If anybody tried to get out there this afternoon, they'd find themselves backed up during rush hour from Route 12 all the way back past the Dimucci property, all the way down almost to Copperfield. Now that's the current existing roadways. They're not sufficient to handle the traffic that's coming through today, much less the traffic that a regional shopping center drawing shoppers from a 15 or 20 mile radius are likely to do. Back in 1999, Taubman suggested that it was going to generate 30 to 40,000 trips to that size mall. If the roads can't handle what they have today, how are they going to handle all this increased traffic? And I would suggest that if you look at the traffic counts that were done back then, and the projections as what the traffic would be were already there, and the property is still being used for agricultural uses. So who is going to pay for the substantial off-site traffic improvements that would be required? That's not being imposed as part of the condition of the village's proposed compromise. It's not being imposed as part of any blanket rezoning of the property. And therefore, without taking into account those substantial impositions and negative effects on the surrounding community, you cannot adequately or properly consider the rezoning of this property. I would also note that in 1999, there was a developer reimbursement agreement for the landowner and the developer in connection with the costs that were imposed by this process. Now, I understand that the Dimuccis have not signed any sort of reimbursement agreement with the county in connection with this process, despite the fact that there are many, many county employees that have been here at all of these. There's been a substantial amount of time, effort, and money put in by the county into this hearing process. I would simply note that Hawthorne Woods is still owed over $65,000 by this applicant and the predecessor applicant, Kaufman, in connection with the 1999 hearings, and it's been more than 12 years, and that debt remains. Finally, I would like to simply point out that while we applaud the two villages and the county for their efforts in coming together and working toward a compromise and consensus, and the county board members that were involved in that process as well, Acre requested a seat at that table. We have some ideas about how we can have a suitable development. It seems to me that the best development that can take place on this site is one that's the product of consensus, not only from the boundary agreements, but also with residential input about what, or the surrounding residents' input about what would appropriately go on that site. I would invite Acre stands ready and willing to meet with the county, the villages, and any other interested party at any time to discuss and share our ideas about the appropriate size, scope, and scale of an appropriate development and site plan for that, which, by the way, we included a site plan that was also taken out to the market in those exhibits. To discuss buffering, to discuss, which, by the way, according to the application, there's literally no buffering shown along Old McHenry Road other than a pond, which I submit does not provide any visual barrier to commercial development. If anything is going to happen on that site, it really needs to include a much larger buffer that circumscribes the site along the Old McHenry side so that there is a visual buffer with sight lines that are then blocked from the surrounding community to whatever is being proposed there. Again, we have some more ideas and some assistance we can provide in that, and we welcome the opportunity to meet with local county and the villages to share those ideas and to form a truly citizen-driven consensus that prior to the signing of any intergovernmental agreement by the county or the village of Hawthorne Woods. We'd also like to discuss and share some ideas about the scope of any office development and how certain types of office buildings along the lines of what was developed at Windstone or what's been used in the Hawthorne Woods Business Park at Midlothian and Old McHenry could be used as part of a visual buffer given the residential character of the architecture, as well as proper placement can be used to assist in this process. Finally, we think that there's a finer point that needs to be put on the letter of intent before it becomes an IGA. It's a good first step. It is a response by the villages to, I think, some incredible pressure from the county to forge a deal. But I think it's important that we continue on in that process. We don't rush to judgment here. We don't rush to drafting and coming up with an IGA. And I would simply point out, as we've gone through this, the county has made certain representations, both through its elected officials and through its zoning and its comprehensive plan, It's made representations about what is appropriate for this site going forward through estate zoning. We bought here 23 years ago, and we found out that it had residential zoning. Had it had commercial zoning, we wouldn't have purchased in the location we did. And I think I speak for the people in the surrounding area. Surrounding residential communities when I said we relied on the commitment that the county was making and on the representation it was making. And a wise man once said, honorable people honor their commitments and reasonable people expect them to do so. We ask that you please honor the commitment that the county is making and that you turn down the zoning request.
Books as evidence. Don't take too much time.
I was just going to say that the judge always asks me that every trial I do, and every time I always forget. But yes, I would put those books into evidence.
Have you provided staff?
Staff has a copy.
How about the Dimucci's?
Clear have been provided a copy, and I would object to any additional evidence. Opportunity to see the documents which Mr. Hunt referred and gave to everyone else.
I would simply point out, sir, that while Mr. Vukovic was not here that evening, there were no copies provided to Aker. As part of that, we had to go to the county and get them on paper. I'd be happy to provide them to Mr. Vukovic. His office is about 2 blocks from mine. I'll make sure a copy gets over to him.
All right, please provide.
Just so the record's clear, those are admitted now.
Pardon?
Just so the record's clear, those are admitted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have you got another witness?
I do.
Mr. Gray, what do you need?
I just wanted to interject, Mr. Chairman, that the village of North Barrington would support a dialogue which includes Aker and the 2 villages and the county.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I would call Greg Schmidt, who is a certified real estate appraiser, to speak briefly about his views and observations of the presentation that was made by the applicant on those issues.
Good evening. I'll condense what I was going to say because I realize patience is running low.
Would you state your name again and spelling of the last name?
Gregory Charles Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-T-T, M-A-I, and SRA designated real estate appraiser to the Appraisal Institute, and State of Illinois generally certified real estate appraiser. I'm also a licensed real estate managing broker in the state of Illinois, and I am also a real estate developer. In fact, the 1-story, 25,000 square feet office in Winston that Mr. Hunt referred to, I built and developed. So I'm extremely familiar with the area that the subject is located in. I was just called yesterday, and I have to apologize relative to seeing if I would testify or make comments relative to surrounding property values, either decreasing, remaining stable, or increasing. And I just received the material and had a chance to look at Clarion's report as well as the transcripts from the last meeting, and just was able to just briefly look at them. Some immediate observations from an appraisal standpoint and a developer's land use standpoint. In Clarion's report, they talk about the Deer Park Town Center being on 80 acres of land and having 386,000 square feet of building area. That works out to I classify a building to land ratio, or normally called a floor area ratio, of 10.3%. The Shops at Killdeer works out to about a 16.72% building to land ratio or floor area ratio. Quinton Collection works out to about 16.44%. And the Town Center Promenade works out to about 13.61%. Typically, commercial retail is anywhere from 10 to 20% floor area ratios. And when you start dealing with lifestyle centers, similar to the Deer Park Town Center, the floor area ratios decrease because more attention is given to common areas, walkways, traffic circles, etc., to create that lifestyle ambiance. The Shops at Killdeer, Quinton Collection, and Town Center, even though they classify them as lifestyle centers, really aren't. They're more what Clarion classifies them as shops or neighborhood centers, something along those lines. If, in fact, we look at the 50 acres of land that is being proposed to be commercial, with 50 plus acres being allocated to open land, we end up with a floor area ratio way and above the 10% for a lifestyle type of center, which would be appropriate for that location if you were to do something commercially rather than a neighborhood strip center. That would get you in the neighborhood of 200 to 400,000 square feet if you use the 10 to 16% ratio. And again, I'm rounding off right now just for benefits for everybody. And you normally see building heights in the 45-foot category, not 65-foot category. Now, I haven't had a chance to go in, as Clarion was able to go into the MLS and extract data and try to do some statistical analysis, though I noted a number of flaws in there as relative that I don't agree with excluding homes over $400,000, and they were including homes that sold from 1995 to 2000, which is pre-development of the Town Center Mall, and that's totally wrong. You want to do there and after. What I can do is talk from a primary data stance rather than a secondary data stance. My office does both residential and commercial appraisals. We do appraisals of single-family homes for lenders and individuals, all the way up to, we're doing right now, 171 lot subdivision, and we do appraisals of retail centers of 2,000–3,000 square feet in the city of Chicago and out up to over 100,000 square feet retail shopping centers. So I'm very familiar with those types of properties and what they do and the dynamics associated with them and what goes on around them. The one that I think that you all are familiar with is the Gurney Mall area, right in Lake County, just north. And we were involved with doing some appraisals in the Hunt Club Farms subdivision immediately west of Gurney Mall on the west side of Hunt Club Road. Gurney Mills is interesting in that they have it's called Westgate Nature Reserve, which runs along the tollway, comes along the north of the mall, and comes back down on the west side with main ingress and egress off of Grand Avenue into the Gurney Mall area, which kind of would be similar to here with Grand Road being the main ingress and egress points. Across on the west side of Hunt Club Road at the along Bridle Trail Road was a 5-acre development that was in place and being built and developed upon before Bernie Mills was proposed. We were involved with one appraisal directly there, where the people bought a 5-acre lot and with a total investment of about $750,000. And when Bernie Mills was built, were only able to garner $500,000 on a resale, or a drop in value of about a third. We also then did extensive research within that subdivision, the Hunt Club farm subdivision, and found that as you further got away, the value declination dropped. So the closer you were, we were looking at about a third value. The further you got away, it dropped down to about a 20% declination. The further you got away from the mall was about a 10% declination. And then at a point, which was right around between 1 and 2 miles, we couldn't see any statistical variations there, and there was no way that we could monitor any value declination. But the closer you got to the mall, you definitely could. And we were talking about the one home in particular that I zeroed in on. That was only about, an 1/8 to a 1/4 mile away, and you had the Westgate Nature Reserve buffer down along the west side of Bernie Mills, and you had Hunt Club Road itself, as well as this was a 5-acre parcel, and the home improvements were located more towards the western end or further away. So we were looking about an 1/8 to a 1/4 mile distance and a third declination in value. We do an awful lot of high-end home residential appraisals. I do all multi-million-dollar home appraisals in Lake Geneva. We've done multi-million-dollar homes along Lake Michigan, on Lake Michigan, in Lake Forest, Highland Park, as well as the 10-acre, 5 to 10-acre plus homes in Barrington Hills. Our office is located in Barrington. So we're, extremely familiar with the area. That's one of the reasons why I was really taken back by the clearing report, where they excluded $400,000 plus homes, because what we've seen and what usually happens, what we've seen in the recent market decline, but what we've seen is when an external negative influence is injected into an area, your higher-end residential homes usually have the larger declination in value associated with them, because the people who can afford to buy in those higher-end homes make a no decision sooner than someone who is more willing to buy a lower-priced home. And what we have in the Hawthorne Woods, North Barrington area, that even excluding Winston, which is a gated community, is you have homes with a median price in the neighborhood of $350,000 to $450,000 homes. So they exclude $400,000 homes from the clearing report. I just don't understand it. But what I'm standing here and telling you today is that the homes that will be surrounding, whether there is open space associated with a 50-acre commercial development, which really should only have about 200,000 to 400,000 square feet, not 800,000 square feet, to allow for adequate parking, knowing that the open area associated with the proposed development is not allowed to have parking, retention, detention, etc. And a normal height restriction requirement allowed for that there will still be value declination going out to within 1 to 2 miles on a circumference circle basis away from the home. It's like a ripple effect. Throw a stone in the water, you're going to have that ripple effect, and you'll have the same thing here with that hole in the donut ripple effect going out around it. That's what I'm here to tell you, and that's what that is from personal experience since 1973 with an education in real estate and urban land economics, undergrad and grad from Wisconsin, and being a professional real estate appraiser over 40 years, as well as doing empirical studies associated with values of residential property adjacent to and/or surrounding commercial development.
Okay, thank you. Take a 15-minute break. How come I didn't get